video that's going viral, posted by this random account on TikTok. He's in Mexico, right?
Okay.
He's just recording outside in the street, but he starts hearing a lot of dogs barking, and then they eventually start howling, and a lot of people are saying that he heard the Llorona, which I can't hear it in the video, but people are saying that if it's far, she's actually close, and if you hear her close, she's actually far.
Yeah.
He commented back, I heard her very, very far.
Chinga tu madre. Otra
That's
vez.
I think that's it, no?
Because it is dogs howling.
That's not a dog.
Yo, I didn't. Nah,
You hear it like
bro.
faintly.
Pedo.
Nah, this shit is crazy, bro. I'm not gonna lie. At first, I thought it was the dog's house.
That's not a dog, bro. Those other ones were not howls, bro. They sounded like a woman crying.
Let me know what you guys think. If you guys think the video is fake, if you guys believe in La Llorona, I think it's fucking real. Only because there's other videos where it's so obvious that they want you to hear like
La Llorona, yeah.
the Llorona and stuff, but this sounds like it's part of the video. And
the TikToker I just showed you in that video, known as Ali Spice, was killed in a head-on car crash in 2022. On December 11th, 2022, Ali and a few of her friends were driving in an Infiniti Q50. While they were driving down the road, though, a random man started driving towards them on the wrong side of the road. This man was 55-year-old Thomas Petrie. Thomas was going the wrong way down the state road in his pickup truck when he collided head-on with the Infiniti Q50. Devin Perkins, the driver of the vehicle, survived, but Ali Spice, who had almost 1 million TikTok followers at the time of her death, and 2 of their friends all died. But instead of stopping, trying to tend to the wounded and helping the people out that he just crashed into, 55-year-old Thomas Petrie decided to drive away and leave the scene of an accident. Thomas had been scheduled to go on trial on September 23rd of this year, but he ended up pleading no contest to the charges. He hasn't been sentenced yet, but this could mean a life sentence in prison for him. In fact, the state sentencing guidelines recommend a minimum of 36 years. And like I said many times on this TikTok, he's 55. So that would mean that he really wouldn't be out of prison even with the minimum until he was in his 90s. After Ali died, there were tons of tributes that flowed out. And it was a reminder that things like this are so unpredictable, so random, they can happen at any time. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
I have some controversial thoughts after watching the Gabby Petito documentary. So one of the biggest things that I struggled throughout this whole documentary with was my thoughts about Brian's sister Cassie. But before that, can we just talk about that policeman who just really seemed to not want to do his job? After Brian returned home from the trip without Gabby, with her van, and then lawyered up, and his parents were stood at the door, 2 police officers saying, "We're not talking about anything, we've got an attorney." The officer was then caught on his body cam footage literally saying, well, we don't have probable cause. He also said something along the lines of, I don't know if this is an exact quote, but he was like, I don't know what you want me to do, to another police officer on the phone. The way my jaw also immediately dropped at just how defensive Brian's parents were. I mean, I knew from the case, I knew a lot of details, obviously having followed the case as it was happening way back when. But just to see the body cam footage and how completely emotionless, cold and defensive they were. It was just such a huge red flag, and I think we could all collectively tell from that point on that something seriously wrong had happened with Gabby and she wasn't coming home safe. Another one of my thoughts was that I do actually think that the officers who stopped the couple, Brian and Gabby, after that incident at the side of the road, tried to do their best. I really do feel like their hearts were in the right place. I just think unfortunately they were incredibly naive in dealing with DV situations. I could tell that the one police officer really actually did want to try and help the couple. The way that he was giving Gabby advice about getting in the shower and saying that that's what his wife would do, I think it just showed he was quite naive in the situation. I also think that they didn't fully consider how that sometimes DV victims will blame themselves, and they weren't really also considering the fact that they literally had an eyewitness say that he had seen the male, I'm not going to call him a gentleman like the actual eyewitness did, but the male had been slapping the female. I think unfortunately, ultimately what was happening was Brian was manipulating the police and did a good job at it. The thing that confused me the most in the whole series, though, was Brian's sister Cassie. I had mixed feelings. At one point, I was like, okay, this girl really doesn't know what's going on. She's just like one of us in the situation, and she really didn't have any insider information. I then had feelings towards her of anger and mistrust when the texts were revealed between her and her mum, so also obviously Brian's mum, when they were almost kind of like mocking the police when Brian had escaped and basically gone on the run. And they were almost just laughing and joking together, and it just seemed really distasteful. At some points I was like, yeah, Cassie seems upset and confused, and then I was thinking, well, we can't forget that Gabby's parents actually did reach out to her to ask if she knew anything, and they just got absolutely nothing back off her. I also found it incredibly confusing and irritating when she reported that on that final camping trip that she went on, there was nothing peculiar to note. I was thinking, other than the fact that his literal fiance has gone missing, he's got her van, he was with her, he's refusing to say anything, and he's got a lawyer. Interestingly though, Cassie has actually spoken out since the documentary was released and stated that she did cut all contact with her parents for the past 2 years, so I wonder what's gone on there.
Sam Ballard was 19 years old with his whole life ahead of him. He was at a party with friends when a dare was thrown out in the air, and it was meant to be innocent and funny. But nobody had an idea of the horror that would follow. One friend spotted something moving near their feet, a small slimy garden slug, and dared Sam to eat it. Sam accepted and then swallowed the slug without hesitation. But lurking within that slug was something deadly. Days after the dare, Sam started feeling sharp pains in his leg and a burning ache that wouldn't go away. His family rushed him to the hospital, desperate for answers. Doctors soon discovered the cause, the rat lungworm. A rare parasite that normally affects rats but had found its way into the slug. Now it was inside Sam, burrowing through his body, infecting his brain and wreaking havoc. The parasite invaded Sam's nervous system, and Sam was soon thrashing in agony. His body wrecked by violent seizures, his skin pale and clammy, and as the parasite buried deeper into his brain, Sam slipped into a coma. For 420 days, Sam laid in a coma, his family helplessly watching as he became a shell of his former self. When he finally woke, he was no longer the same young man he was before. The infection had ravaged his body, leaving him quadriplegic, unable to walk, talk, or even feed himself. Every day was a battle against pain, infections, and complications that no one could have imagined. Sam fought for nearly 8 years, enduring unimaginable suffering before he passed away in 2018.
A video that a woman filmed before she actually went missing. It's like her last ever recording, because her and her husband had a rocky relationship and she had a feeling that something bad was gonna happen.
This is me, July 29th, 2008, covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after, as much as that's possible.
After the video was recorded, nothing really happened, but a year and a half later is when she went missing. She didn't show up for work, and the kids, they didn't show up to daycare. The father didn't show up to work either, so everybody was reported missing. A couple hours later, the dad and the 2 boys arrived back to the house. He was just saying like, nah, I don't know where she went, and then they end up interviewing the little boy. He basically ends up saying how mommy was with us, but she didn't come back with us. He didn't know why she didn't come back with us.
Nah.
Weeks after she disappeared, he ends up telling one of the carers mommy's dead, and then a couple months after that, her younger son, the 2-year-old, ends up drawing a picture of a car and 3 people and says that mommy's in the trunk. 2 years later, CPS, they bring the kids to the husband. They run inside, but then he closes the door on the CPS worker.
And something really weird has happened. The kids went into the house, and the biological parent, whose name is Josh Powell, will not let me in the door. And I could hear one of the kids crying.
Okay, so you don't live there, right?
No, I'm contracted to the state to provide supervised visitation.
And who is there to exercise their visitation?
I am. And the visit is with Josh Powell.
And who's
And he
supervising?
is the husband of I supervise.
So you supervise and you're doing the visit?
I'm the supervisor here.
Wait a minute. If it's a supervised visit, you can't supervise yourself.
Out of nowhere, she ends up smelling gasoline coming from the house, and then
There was this dude that came in for raping a 2-year-old little girl. He literally stuck a whole broom up his ass. I still have the vision in my head because it looked like a cartoon. You were like, where's the other... Where's the rest of the broom? Yeah.
Did you know that in 2021, the United States government paid $5.4 billion to house child sex predators in their prisons? So this study was released by a Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Health researcher. And yes, like I just said, your hard-earned money that the government takes for taxes, $5.4 billion of that money is being spent on housing child sex predators. I mean, that is an absolutely staggering number. And obviously it has to do with the number of offenders that exist in the United States. There's so many of them, and we have such a big problem here in America with those sorts of crimes. But I literally could not believe that. And here's another disturbing statistic for you. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys under the age of 18 experience sexual abuse during childhood. And data also shows that 12% of the world's children will be abused before they turn 18. I want you to just think about that for a second. Let's say you take a group of 4 young girls, 4 children. Statistically, here in America, it's likely that one of those 4 girls, children, will be molested before they turn 18. Now, repeat that over and over and over throughout the entire population of children in America. That's a fucking problem. That is a massive problem that you don't see politicians talking about too often. And this should piss you off. But to end this, I'm going to play you another clip from that same video, that interview with that guy, discussing how other prisoners take care of child molesters in prison.
There was this dude that came in for raping a 2-year-old little girl. He literally stuck a whole broom up his ass. I still have the vision in my head because it looked like a cartoon. You were like, where's the other... Where's the rest of the broom? Yeah, where's the rest of the broom? And his hands... They had hit him with metal pipes so many times. All the bones were broke on his hands, so he was trying to put his hands down. And it was just like, you know, it's even hard to explain.
Guy Pearce, I've now read the comments that you made about me, and while I would have preferred...
So Kevin Spacey's back in the media trying to act like he never did anything wrong. So let me just remind you of a few of the things that he's accused of doing. Back in 2017, an actor named Anthony Rapp testified that at a party in 1986, Kevin Spacey, who at the time was 27 years old, made a move on him when he was just 14. And when those allegations dropped, so many more followed. There were allegations from a Boston anchorwoman named Heather Unruh, who claimed that Kevin Spacey sexually assaulted her own son. Then there was filmmaker Tony Montana, who said that he was left with PTSD for 6 months after Kevin Spacey unexpectedly and without consent grabbed his crotch. There's also actor Robert Cavazos, who came forward and said that he had been touched by Kevin Spacey. And Robert also stated that all the young men that surrounded Spacey knew that at some point they'd probably be harassed by him. Then he was accused of sexual misconduct by 8 different staff members of the show House of Cards he worked on, and at this point the floodgates really opened. Police departments across the world, from the United Kingdom to Los Angeles, California, started looking into past reports about Kevin Spacey. In LA, he was investigated for a sexual assault that allegedly happened in 1992. Then another lawsuit was filed that he assaulted a masseuse at his home in 2016. And I could go on and on and on. But Kevin's had some good luck. A number of the charges against him have been dropped. People have withdrawn their lawsuits. And a number of the people who have come forward to speak about him have died mysterious and sudden deaths. But just because Kevin Spacey has never been actually convicted of one of these crimes, that doesn't mean that he's not guilty of them. This whole thing essentially has boiled down to his word versus theirs. And I'm the type of person that always believes victims. Especially when you work like me in exposing pedophile rings and these pedophile predators, you always start out believing the victims and then work backwards. And if there wasn't any truth to any of these allegations, why would they have been brought up in the very first place? I mean, there's also the fact that you have to bring up here that Kevin Spacey was known to be friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He's tried to go on shows and deny it, but he's on the flight logs. So yeah, it's horrible because Kevin Spacey is indeed a great actor and he's been in some of my favorite films. But it absolutely sickens me to see people defending him when there is so much evidence of the things that have happened. And we just can't let people like this fool us into thinking that they're completely innocent. I just can't believe that those are some of the comments that I've been reading about Kevin Spacey when it's very, very clear that this guy is a pretty bad dude. And that's saying it very, very lightly.
Ted Bundy, one of America's most infamous serial killers, was a master manipulator hiding his dark urges behind charm and intelligence. Between 1974 and 78, Bundy kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered at least 30 young women, though the true number may be far higher. His reign of terror finally ended when he was sentenced to death in Florida. In 1989, Bundy had the chance to request a final meal, but instead, he declined, leaving his fate to the standard prison menu: medium rare steak, eggs over easy, toast with butter and jelly, hash browns, milk, coffee, and juice. He ate very little of it, his appetite completely gone, knowing the electric chair awaited him at dawn. Minutes before his execution, Bundy sat in silence. There was no final words of remorse, no pleas for mercy. Just the hum of the electric chair, the last sound he would ever hear. Next, John Wayne Gacy. He entertained children as a clown at fundraisers, but behind the makeup, John Wayne Gacy was a monster. Between 1972 and 78, he lured at least 33 young men to his home, where he assaulted, tortured, and murdered them, burying most of the bodies under his house. When his crimes were finally uncovered, Gacy showed no remorse, laughing at the families of his victims in court. In 1994, before his execution by lethal injection, Gacy requested a meal fit for a king: a bucket of fried chicken, fried shrimp, French fries, and fresh strawberries. After finishing his meal, Gacy's last words were chilling: "Kiss my ass." He showed no fear, no regret, just arrogance, even as the poison flowed through his veins.
When a little girl vanished, a huge search was underway. Then not one but 2 bodies were found. It was the 10th of February 2020 in Casey, South Carolina. At around 3 p.m, a 6-year-old little girl hopped off the school bus. Now this was sweet little Faye Sweatlick. Faye was a really energetic, fun little girl. She was always splashing in puddles and dragging people along to play with her. She absolutely loved life. She lived nearby with her mum, Selena, who met her off the bus that day. The pair walked back home, just chatting and catching up about what little Faye had been doing all day at school. Faye then had a snack when she got home and went out to play as usual in the local area. A neighbour saw her that day and confirmed that she seemed happy and completely normal. Then she was spotted at around 3:30ish near to a place called NAPA Auto Parts. Now this is basically literally at the back of her home. However, at 3:45, Selena stuck her head out again to check on Faye, and she had vanished. Now she was obviously very distressed by this, and after racing round neighbours' houses and having no luck finding her, she rang her boyfriend Carter to alert him. He said he would keep an eye out and come home, and then she rang police. She was crying while she told the operator that she couldn't find her daughter. Now I've covered this case in more detail on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation, so head over to Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to listen to the full 911 call. Now officers raced to the scene, but they were really worried. It had started to get dark already, and there was no sign of this missing girl. Frustratingly though, the police bizarrely announced that there was not enough evidence of an abduction, and her disappearance didn't meet the criteria for an Amber Alert, which I just thought was absolutely ridiculous. There's a little girl missing. Now her biological dad's house was searched, but she wasn't there, and he had a strong alibi. Roadblocks were set up and cars were searched as they sort of came in and out of the local area to see if anybody actually had kidnapped her. CCTV of the child getting off the bus was also shared on the news to try and jog anyone's memory. Police then started looking into people closest to Faye, such as her mum and her mum's boyfriend. They searched the family home on the 12th of February and were alarmed to find blood on a pillowcase in the house. Could Selena or Carter be responsible? After further investigation, they found that Carter actually did have a small open wound on his face, and that was where the blood had come from. Investigators also continued to interview just people in the local area. They came across a man at 602 Piccadilly Square. Now his roommate was Coty Taylor. Coty had apparently been alone in the house at the time that the little girl vanished, as his roommate had been at work. Coty, though, said to police that he was asleep during the disappearance. A search of the house was conducted, but nothing was found. Search teams continued to scour the area, and finally there was a devastating discovery. At around 10 a.m. and less than 200 feet from her home was Faye's body. She'd been partially buried. But just 15 minutes later, there was another shocking discovery. Coty Taylor's roommate had come home to find Coty lying on the floor in a pool of blood. There was a knife next to his body. So what on earth had happened? An autopsy confirmed Faye had been strangled with a bin bag that was tied around her neck. Cody's death was determined to be a self-unaliving. A further search of Cody's house was conducted and a partially emptied soil bag was found. They also found video footage of Cody, quote, dumping material from a large bag onto the burial site of Faye. Now, there was so much more evidence that they found pinning this horrific crime on Cody, so if you're interested in hearing all of that, please do head over to the Born Investigation podcast. It was deemed that Cody had killed the little girl and hid her body in his house for 2 days before unaliving himself to avoid facing justice.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
There's been a horrific shooting in Texas in which a 10-year-old girl was the only survivor. On the 30th of May at around 5 p.m, gunshots could be heard in Spring in Texas. It's believed that a shooting occurred at an apartment complex involving 2 adults and a child. The female victim is said to have been 33 and the mother to the 10-year-old girl. The male was 39 years old. Police state that the male was the mother's boyfriend. He's believed to have shot the mother in a dispute and the child was caught in the crossfire. The man is then said to have turned the gun on himself. Although tragically the mother passed away, after being shot in the stomach, the 10-year-old girl miraculously survived. It's reported that she bravely managed to call her nan to get help. Her nan then called 911 and officers raced to the scene. The child was airlifted to hospital and underwent life-saving surgery. She is currently believed to be in the custody of her grandmother. Police have called the incident a murder self-unaliving and aren't looking for any other suspects.
These are illegal islands you can't visit but people went anyway, Part 1. Up first is North Sentinel Island. North Sentinel Island is one of the Andaman Islands and is home to an indigenous tribe. They are called the Sentinelese and they are an uncontacted tribe who allow no visit from the outside world. But in 2018, John Chow illegally traveled to the island in an attempt to convert the tribe to Christianity. And to no surprise, John was killed by the Sentinelese as they allow no contact with the outside world. John paid 2 fishermen $335 to take him near the island and the 2 fishermen were arrested. And it's also believed that John knew his fate as he wrote in his diary, "Please do not be angry at them, or God if I get killed. Don't retrieve my body." John tried to visit the island 3 times but failed the first 2 times as the tribe got mad at him. And on his last visit, John told the fishermen to abandon him on the island. And the fishermen later saw the tribe dragging John's body and the next day they saw his body being buried on the shore. And some sources even claim that the Sentinelese people ate John's body. So whatever you do, you should never ever go to North Sentinel Island.
Sarah Stern, right? She had lost her mother. She had gotten a big inheritance from her mother. Her aunt told her to not tell anybody, right?
Okay.
No friend, no family member. She ends up telling her friend Liam. They were friends since they were 6. Time goes by and shit until out of nowhere they just can't find Sarah. They end up asking a few close members who was the last person that was always next to Sarah.
They said Liam, didn't they?
They start asking him questions. When was the last time you saw Sarah? And he's like, oh, yesterday we went out to eat. I dropped her off and I went to go to work. That was the last time I saw her. A couple of days go by. They start asking him more questions and they were like, did she ever mention like she wanted to escape or... And he was like, oh yeah, she has a lot of self-destructive tendencies. Her mother's loss would always get to her and stuff. But the thing that was weird about it is that why would she commit after finding about all of this money?
Makes no sense.
Some time passed by. He told his friend like some weird ass idea. Imagine a film where I kill this person and then I throw him off a bridge and
Oddly specific.
Yeah, exactly. So he went to the cops and said, he mentioned this story to me, but like maybe it was a crazy idea that he had, but I don't know, it felt like a little bit too coincidental. The cops end up telling him to meet up with Liam and they put a security camera in there, like, call his confession? Watch.
I got the FBI on my ass, dude.
About what?
About killing Sarah. That's not even the worst part. The worst part of it is
Delaware. Yes. I need everyone's phones. I want them all to FaceTime their family. Hi.
This is former Mr. Beast employee Delaware, aka Charles Robert Jefferson. Now, Delaware, as he was known on the channel, appeared in a few Mr. Beast videos. Ironically, that clip from the beginning of the video was from a video where Mr. Beast and the crew spent time in prison. And this is where it gets disturbing. So you can see right here, he's registered, meaning he's a registered sex offender. And these charges are incredibly disturbing. Now, Charles Robert Jefferson, he was actually only 16 when this stuff happened. So I've seen people online talking about how he should be given a break because he was also a minor, which is completely wrong. Because as you can see, the victim of this crime was 11 years old. I mean, let that sit for a second. That's disturbing. That's really disturbing. And something else bizarre about this whole thing is that Delaware, when he was in the Mr. Beast videos and when he was featured, they only called him by this nickname, Delaware. I am assuming that was an attempt to hide his identity. And also, he frequently wore masks, which I can assume also was an attempt to hide his real identity. And when you hire somebody like this that has this sort of thing in their past to work on a YouTube channel with entertainment geared towards kids, I understand why he wouldn't want people to know who this guy really was. But that's disturbing, isn't it? I mean, you would imagine that somebody would have had to do a background check on that guy, especially before not only hiring him, but putting him on camera multiple times. And I'm sure that Mr. Beast Jimmy is going to come out and say he had no idea, blah, blah, blah. But then why the attempts to hide his identity? Why the nickname? Why wearing the mask when nobody else was doing that sort of a thing? And when you're an entertainer as large as Mr. Beast, when you run such a massive company, and a massive significant portion of your audience is children and minors, there definitely shouldn't have been any sex offenders working on the show. If you want to join me as I expose pedophile rings and talk about these horrific sorts of crimes, listen to my new podcast, The Conspiracy Files, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or check out my YouTube channel. This stuff is a major problem, not only here in America, but across the planet. And only by waking people up to this shit are we going to be able to change something.
This is the scary story about the family portraits. One day, there was a man who was hunting in the woods, and as night fell, he found himself in an unfamiliar part of the forest. He walked and walked, but he couldn't find his way home. Wandering aimlessly in the dark, he eventually came to a small clearing where an old ramshackle cabin stood. Tired and weary, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. When he came closer to the cabin, he saw that the door was standing wide open. Poking his head inside, he could see that the little cabin was completely empty, but there was a bed and a fire burning in the fireplace. The hunter threw himself on the bed and decided to sleep there for the night. If the owner came back, he would ask his permission in the morning. Lying on the bed half asleep, he looked around and was surprised to see the walls were covered with paintings. They appeared to be family portraits, all framed and painted in incredible detail. They seemed very lifelike, and without exception, each portrait was uglier than the next. The hideous faces in the paintings made him incredibly uneasy. The way they were painted made it seem as if their eyes were staring directly at him. It was incredibly unnerving. He decided that the only way he was going to get any sleep was to ignore the hideous faces staring at him. So he turned on his side facing the wall and pulled the blanket over his head and drifted off to sleep. In the morning, when the hunter woke up to find the cabin completely lit up by sunlight, he looked around and noticed that there was no family portraits on the walls at all. There was only windows.
You will never convince me that once a deranged person starts brutally killing, that they suddenly just stop. I'm specifically talking about how in 1979, a killer stalked and murdered 5 people in Houston, Texas within 2 months, and in 2 of those cases kept the victims' heads, yet they've never been found. The killing started at the Orchard Apartments on 5909 Glenmont Drive in Houston. On the morning of July 27, 1979, a coworker of 33-year-old Alice Rankin arrived at her apartment to pick her up for work. His name was Bob. At the time, Alice's car was in the shop being repaired, and since the two both worked for the same engineering firm, Bob agreed to pick her up and take her to work until her car was fixed. But when he arrived, he noticed that Alice's front door was slightly ajar, and when he peeked inside, he saw Alice lying nude in her bed with both of her feet bound together. A pillow was covering the upper half of her body, and when he moved the pillow, he saw a gruesome sight. Alice had been decapitated decapitated and her head was missing. So obviously Bob called 911, and when Houston police arrived, they found a puddle of blood dripping down the side of her bed. And this turned out to be where the killer set her head down after removing it. A blood trail was then discovered dripping outside of her front door and into the apartment's parking lot. Police believe that after the killer decapitated her, they calmly walked out of the apartment holding her head, tossed it into their car, and drove off. And despite a massive search, her head has never been found. There's practically no evidence left behind, but police did know that she was sexually assaulted. This brutal murder was already enough to put people on edge, but then 2 weeks later, and just 2 floors above Alice in that same apartment complex, the body of 27-year-old Mary Calcutta was found in her bathroom. She'd been stabbed dozens of times and was also sexually assaulted just like Alice. According to Houston police, Mary fought back harder than any victim they had ever seen, starting at the front door until she just couldn't fight anymore. The killer stabbed her with such force that the knife went all the way through her and actually bent the blade. Since they were both killed in the same apartment complex, the police started to piece together any connection or link that the two might have, and the only thing they found on top of living in the same complex was that they were both women who lived alone. They also found butcher knives in both of their apartments, which I'm assuming was the murder weapon. Because of this, police believe that it was the same person who murdered both women. After these grisly murders, a lot of people began moving out of the Orchard apartments. But in a shocking twist, on the same day that Mary's body was found, another brutal murder occurred just a few miles away. On August 10th, 1979, an exterminator walked into a Houston townhouse and found the body of 26-year-old Doris Threadgill. Her throat had been slashed so violently and so deeply that her head was nearly severed from her body. Fear spread throughout Houston as police worked to figure out who was doing this. But then, the killer struck again, and another headless victim was found. On the evening of October 3rd, just 2 months later, police were called to a neighborhood near Freed Park in northwest Houston. A resident heard a woman screaming, quote, "Help, don't do this to me." When they looked out their window, they saw a woman being dragged by her hair into a house by a man in a hat, and then they heard a gunshot, followed by silence. This all took place on the front porch of a house just 5 blocks away from Doris's home. When Houston police arrived, they did an incredibly small investigation but found no blood on the front porch. So they told the residents that what they heard were actually just firecrackers and not gunshots. But just the next morning, police came back and they did in fact find blood on the front porch. And shortly after this, they discovered the body of 16-year-old Joanne Huffman. They found her in Watonga Park about 4 miles away, and she had been shot in the mouth. And if you didn't already guess, this turned out to be the woman that was screaming on the front porch just the night before. As this was unfolding, authorities were called to a nearby used car dealership. A sales manager stumbled across a white Dodge covered in blood, and when police opened the trunk, they found the headless body of 18-year-old Robert Spangenberger, who was Joanne's boyfriend. Robert and Joanne were reportedly going to get married, and just the night before had gone out to have some fun. But by the next morning, both of them were dead, and just like Alice, Robert's head has never been found. The community then dubbed this killer as the Houston Decapitator. Unfortunately, no evidence was left behind at either scene, and to this day, all 5 murders remain unsolved. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence, absolutely nothing, which is terrifying to me considering just how brutal each murder was. The only theory that police have is that the Orchard apartment murders of Alice and Mary were committed by the same killer, who they believe has way more victims than just the 2. But Houston homicide detectives aren't sure if the murders of Joanne and Robert were committed by the same killer, and they found no link or connection to the murder of Doris. After these murders, it seems like the killer just stopped, and nothing else was ever connected to these cases. Because of how seemingly random and violent these murders were, it's left many wondering if there was a serial killer terrorizing Houston in 1979, and if they're still out there.
2008, right?
Yeah.
There was a case with a Greyhound bus. Tim McLean was going from Edmonton to Winnipeg. This happened in Canada.
Okay, I was gonna say, where the fuck is that?
All the witnesses say he was in the back of the bus with his hoodie on, headphones on. He wasn't really focusing on anything, wasn't talking to anybody, right? A couple hours later, on different stop, this guy, Vincent Lee, gets on. At first, he ended up sitting in the front of the bus, away from everybody else, and he ends up going all the way to the back of the bus and sits right next to Tim McLean. He didn't really think too much of it, right? Until out of nowhere, Vincent pulled out a knife and he just started stabbing his chest and his neck. The passengers start freaking out and the bus driver pulls over. They all rush to get off. The bus driver tries to get back on to help Tim. It's already too late. Like, people start calling 911 and stuff. That's when Vincent starts cutting his head off, takes it and start like showing it to everybody,
like, look what the fuck I did.
And he starts cutting little pieces off. First he eats his heart, and then he starts eating the rest of his body as well.
Wait, in front of the cops, or he's been doing that?
He's in front of the cops, bro. He obviously stops and gets arrested. He ends up obviously on trial and shit. March 2009 mark him as mentally insane, and they can't put him in jail. The reason why was because he said Tim was a demon and that God had told him to kill him.
That sounds like some schizophrenia.
But then over time he was slowly given more freedom. He was allowed to a different city with supervision.
Bro, don't tell tell me some shit's gonna happen.
And in 2017, he was set free. And still to this day,
He's free?
they gave him the right to legally change his name.
So you're telling me if he had moved to the US,
Somebody could have passed him, bro. And they would have never known.
Imagine.
This case will put you off ever dating a man again. It was August 2023 in Ohio. Shannon Hyatt and Chance Donahoe had previously dated for around a year and a half. Now, the relationship was far from a happy one, and when the pair eventually split up, Shannon actually felt the need to install security cameras in her home and change the locks. She did everything she could to cut contact. She blocked him on social media, and she even had a mutual friend return his property to him so she didn't have to contact him or see him. And Shannon was right to be concerned. Chance heard rumours that Shannon was moving on and started seeing someone new. Disturbingly, he'd been hanging around outside her house and actually saw a male's car parked outside. He thought if he couldn't have her, nobody could. On the 29th of August, when Shannon was alone in the home, he wouldn't have done this when a male's car was parked outside, Chance broke into her house. He ambushed the innocent woman, attacking and stabbing her. The attack was so violent he inflicted over 30 stab wounds on her. Once he had murdered her, he screwed Shannon's door shut in an apparent attempt to prevent her body from being found. Disturbingly, Chance had also abused Shannon's body after killing her. Now, Chance fled to a petrol station in Liberty Township before eventually handing himself over to police. He admitted the killing and pleaded guilty to aggravated murder. He also pleaded guilty to abuse of a corpse. He was given 31 years in prison with the chance of parole.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This pedophile senator from North Dakota is one of the most disturbed people I've ever researched. This is all coming out right now in the news, so let's talk about it. Ray Holmberg was born in 1944, and he was first elected to the North Dakota Senate as a Republican in 1976. He ended up serving as a senator for decades, and he became one of the longest serving senators in United States history. But behind the scenes, Ray was carrying out the most demonic activities you can imagine. The first allegations against him came out in 2020, when a man named Canton Todd came out and said that Ray had sexually assaulted him in 2010. You can read some of his tweet there. Canton provided evidence of where he was assaulted, and investigators were actually able to show that that apartment was indeed owned by the senator. And they were also able to confirm that the senator was seen with that guy around the same time. But nothing ever came out of this. Then in 2022, a huge scandal erupted. It turns out Ray Holmberg had shared 72 text messages with a child predator inside of prison. So this guy was sentenced for CP production and distribution. And while he was in prison, Ray Holmberg texted him 72 times. Now, obviously, people were asking, what were these texts about? Well, some of the texts that were eventually recovered showed Holmberg asking this convicted predator if he could meet up with his 19 to 20-year-old boyfriend to give him a massage. Holmberg has claimed in the news that these text messages were just about some lawn care, that this pedophile just happened to be redoing his lawn and that's what he was texting him about. And when he was pressed by members of the press, he stated the messages were just simply gone. I don't understand this. In most cases, the police can immediately go back and retrieve any text messages from criminals. So why haven't they done this yet with this guy? But this only gets significantly worse. Just 2 days ago, Ray Holmberg pled guilty to child sex tourism. If you're confused on what that means, this means that Ray, while he was a United States Senator, was traveling overseas to engage in acts with minors. Prosecutors in the case alleged that he traveled 14 times to Prague in the Czech Republic between the years 2011 and 2021 to pay to engage in acts with minors. And even more disturbingly, a number of these trips were state trips. So that means that the United States government was paying for him to go over to the Czech Republic. And he was there on an official capacity. So he definitely did this, and when this all came out, it brought up the history of CP charges that were also leveled at him in the past. That's right, they also discovered that between 2012 and 2013, Ray, who was a United States Senator at the time, was using the alias Sean Evans online to, quote, convince a child to send him sexually explicit images. aka this freak was pretending to be a child online to receive CP from a child. So with all of this, the sexual assault, the traveling to a country to engage in acts with minors, the CP, all of that, you would imagine this guy would go away for a long time, right? These are serious, terrible charges. Well, no, because he pled guilty, he's going to get a sweetheart deal. That means that the Department of Justice dropped the CP charges against him, and the judge is believed to, quote, recommend the low end of the sentencing guideline range. His lawyers have said they expect him to get 3 to 4 years in prison. So for molesting multiple young boys, for convincing a child to send him graphic material, for sexually assaulting a man, for being in contact with a child predator who probably sent him other stuff that got deleted, this guy is going to get 3 to 4 years in prison. Gotta love American justice, right? If you want to join me on my journey to expose pedophiles and creeps like this, listen to my new podcast, The Conspiracy Files. You can either watch it on YouTube or you can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in a few weeks, we're going to be doing an episode about pedophile members of Congress and the Senate, and it's really, really disturbing stuff. This guy's definitely going in there.
This woman fatally stabbed her boyfriend over 100 times during what her lawyer said was a cannabis-induced psychosis. Yet she walked free and only got community service. This is Bryn Spacher. She met 26-year-old Chad O'Melia at a dog park in California in early May of 2018, and the two began dating. But only a few weeks later, she would go on to brutally kill him. It was around midnight on May 27th when she went over to his apartment in Thousand Oaks, California, and the two began smoking weed out of a bong. According to Bryn, she didn't want to take the last hit, but she said that Chad pressured her into doing it. Sometime after, according to her, she had an adverse reaction to the weed and proceeded to stab him 108 times with multiple different knives. When authorities arrived, they found Chad lying in a pool of blood. Bryn was screaming hysterically and holding a long serrated bread knife, and before police could get to her, she plunged the knife into her own neck. Authorities had to tase her and hit her multiple times with their batons to subdue her. Chad was pronounced dead at the scene, but paramedics were able to save Bryn's life. She was initially arrested after the incident, but was released on bail, where she would go on to live her life free in the public until the trial began in December of last year. Bryn was facing only 4 years in prison, but during the trial, her attorney claimed that the murder was a direct result of a cannabis-induced psychotic disorder. They also said that she was involuntarily intoxicated because Bryn claimed that Chad intimidated her into taking the last bong hit. And under California criminal law, people are responsible for their actions when impaired by alcohol or drugs, unless their intoxication was involuntary. Because of this, the jury took less than 4 hours to convict her of involuntary manslaughter. Judge David Worley of the Ventura County Superior Court sentenced her to 2 years probation with no prison time at all for the murder. Bryn also has to complete 100 hours of community service focused on raising awareness about the effects of marijuana-induced psychosis. Judge Worley said that his decision was based on the lack of culpability. He said that from that point forward, after smoking marijuana, Bryn had no control over her own actions. Bryn's lawyer was obviously very happy with this ruling, as he said, quote, "Judge Worley did the right and courageous thing," end quote. On the other hand, Chad's family is completely heartbroken over this decision. He was only 26. He was a hardworking accountant. He was kind, motivated, and everyone's friend, and he had his whole life ahead of him. His family says that this ruling sets a dangerous precedent, and that Judge Worley basically just gave everyone in the state of California who smokes weed a license to kill. This case is honestly insane, but I'm curious to know what you guys think about it.
This cult is called Heaven's Gate. It gained its infamy in 1997 when all of the members, it was led by two people, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. And many people were attracted to their cult because they blended a lot of science fiction and a bunch of Christian aspects to it. So for example, they taught that Mary from the Bible, she was abducted by a spacecraft and that's how she got impregnated. And the premise of the whole cult was that a UFO was gonna come and sweep all the cult members and save them and bring them to this new afterlife. It was called Tella, and that anybody on Earth that didn't go on the UFO, they would basically be wiped out and killed. And then Bonnie ended up dying from cancer, and the co-members were like, what the fuck now? He ended up twisting the message around, saying that she did ascend to Tella and that aliens had gave her a signal. If she left her body as a vessel, she would still ascend. If you leave your body behind, which is him saying if you could ascend. 1997 comes, they're gonna go to this mansion that they have in San Diego. The first group would go go, they would drink sleeping medicine, applesauce, and then chug a bunch of vodka. Put a bag over their heads, they would just die. Then the second group would come in, clean up the mess, put their bodies in beds, and then they would put a purple blanket on top of their heads. And then that group would do the same thing. Then the third group that had Marshall in it did the same thing as well. Total of 39 members ended up dying. And also, before their whole hours before, they recorded interviews of them basically saying their goodbyes. Or
people in the world who thought that I had completely lost my marbles. They're not right.
Now you're gonna find this old crummy vehicle.
This disturbing Venezuelan video is absolutely awful, and whatever you do, don't go searching for it. In January of 2018, a gruesome video went viral in Venezuela and Latin America. Many people claim this video came from the Middle East or India, but it indeed did come from Venezuela. This clip highlights the issue of forced labor and people trafficking in Venezuela, as many who work in the illegal mines tend to be migrants. The victim in this video has still yet to be identified and more than likely never will. What is known is that the victim was from Guyana and arrived in Venezuela to work the illegal mines. Why he was murdered is up to debate, but according to some reports, the victim was stealing or being in cahoots with people he shouldn't have been with, and this could possibly be why he was murdered. In one article, it says the victim's murder was ordered by a farmer named Tilson. Allegedly, he ordered the murder to send a message to his workers who stole from him. This seems to be the reason for the killing, as in the video you hear a man talking, accusing the victim of being a thief. The video is 2 minutes and 16 seconds long and is extremely hard to watch. Whatever you do, never go searching for it. In the first 15 seconds of the video, the person filming, who may be the farmer previously mentioned, roughly states, "This is a message to all of those who want to rob from my farm. I am the greatest in Venezuela." All while the statement is being read, the camera is fixated on the victim's face. The victim is lying on the ground on his back and is gagged with his hands tied. The victim looks young and, if I had to guess, is either in his late teens or early 20s. As he lays there waiting for his fate, the fear in his eyes says 1,000 words. After this statement is read, the brutality begins. A man then enters shot who has his face covered and is carrying some sort of knife. He bends down next to the victim and begins slicing off his right ear. The victim makes no noise, but he scrunches up his face and closes his eyes as he absorbs the pain. The gang member then moves over to the victim's left ear and slices it off. Once both ears are cut off, the victim lets out painful sighs. The killer then appears to hand the knife over to the person filming, and in a POV type of shot, you see the person filming waving the knife around while accusing him of being a thief, while saying, "This is what would happen to anyone who steals from me." The victim tries to plead his case and his voice cracks and breaks several times. You literally hear the fear in his voice. A man then enters shot who is the same man who cut off the victim's ears, but this time he is carrying a machete. The killer then takes the machete and slams the blade down against the victim's throat, hitting his Adam's apple area. Blood erupts from his neck, shooting up in the air, and you begin to hear the sound of gurgling blood. The victim instinctively sits up and blood pours out like a river. In a matter of seconds, his entire chest is covered red in blood. It looks like you kind of poured a bucket of red paint all over him. The noises you hear at this point are like squeals, and it's honestly horrific. The killer then takes the machete and slams the blade twice onto the back of the victim's neck, and the noises become even more horrific. The killer with the machete then takes the blade and strikes the victim several more times on the back of his neck, and at this point the victim appears to pass out or pass away. The amount of blood in this video is insane, and the quality of the video is actually good, making it even worse to watch. Because as we know, in most of these videos, the quality is pretty bad. The video then concludes as the victim is lying in a pool of his own blood, half decapitated. The fear in the victim's eyes really stick with you, and it's just sad. And what makes the video even worse is the fact that the victim is extremely young, maybe between the ages of 15 and 21. This is just another example of the disturbing world we live in, and this is just awful.
Wheelie bin murderer. In Surrey in 2019, one Friday morning, it was bin day. The bin men came along and tried to remove one of the bins from outside one of the houses. However, they noticed how heavy it was and they just simply couldn't remove it. When the landlord comes by 3 weeks later, he actually notices a human foot sticking out of the bin. Melanie Wallner, a 30-year-old South African woman, had been living at the house. She'd met a German man called Peter, and the two started dating and actually got married fairly quickly. However, the marriage was was far from perfect, and it was claimed that Peter had many affairs. In 2006, Melanie found out about Peter's latest affair and confronted him about it. After an apparent argument, Melanie popped her sleep mask on and tried to get some rest. Peter then, while Melanie is completely unaware and defenseless, actually hits her around the head with a heavy griddle pan. He then put a plastic bag over her head and hid her body in a sleeping bag. He immediately went online and ordered a large lockable freezer. This is where he would eventually keep Melanie's body. He told neighbours that they had simply split up and she'd left the country. To her friends and family, however, he told them that there had been a terrible accident. He tried to do CPR, but unfortunately she passed away. When Melanie's parents tried to come to the UK, presumably to go to a funeral to say goodbye to their daughter, Peter insisted they didn't come. He even travelled to South Africa to see her parents and took an urn with him and said that he'd had her cremated. It turned out the urn was just filled with ash from his barbecue. Peter actually got away with this for 3 years until he wanted to move out of the property. He decided to place Melanie in a wheelie bin and hoped that the bin men would just take her and put her in landfill. Luckily, because the bin men refused to take the bin, Melanie was discovered. Peter tried to claim to police that he'd done this in self-defense. Obviously, the fact that she was wearing a sleep mask showed she was completely defenseless, and this was not a self-defense attack. Peter was given life in prison.
And he did say that he enjoys the Catch Me Outside girl and thinks she's funny, so let's just...
So that just shows what...
Let's be real. You want to put your dick in her?
I mean, it's rather...
probably not.
Enjoying someone and putting your...
What you just heard was Mr. Beast making a sex joke about a minor. And this is incredibly disturbing because Mr. Beast is one of the world's top children's entertainers. I mean, this is literally a photograph of him at the Kids' Choice Awards. And in that clip, you can hear him say, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I would never do that. I was just kidding." But either way, that joke is so incredibly off color. I mean, the girl was, I think, 13 at the time that joke was made. And the phrase that came out of his mouth should just never come out of somebody's mouth, especially when you are running a huge YouTube channel. Now, I know that Mr. Beast can't go back in time and take back the things that he said, but in addition, there have been some other disturbing things that have come out recently, like all the drama against Ava Chris Tyson, Mr. Beast's very close friend and former employee, who was recently exposed for messaging minors sexual things on Discord, and also accused of a bunch of other things, including sexual assault. And a lot of people think that Mr. Beast Jimmy himself was covering all this stuff up, trying to protect his brand and his friend. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that Mr. Beast himself was in those same explicit Discord chats talking about, I don't even know how to say that without getting banned. There's also the fact that Mr. Beast hired and worked with a sex offender. These charges, you can access the court documents online, stem from this guy allegedly assaulting an 11-year-old girl. I say allegedly because Jake the Viking, this guy's brother-in-law, has been defending him all day. But I don't understand how an innocent man takes a plea deal on charges like that. And either way, he was a registered sex offender when Mr. Beast hired him. And I think it's incredibly ignorant and insulting to insinuate that you didn't check on this guy's background. I mean, I'm assuming that a very light background check would have revealed that this guy was a sexual predator. And yet, Mr. Beast did nothing. And yeah, this is just, it's really disturbing stuff. And if you think that in that podcast, that was the last time that the group talked about some pedophile stuff, you would be wrong.
No, seriously.
I mean, as long as there's no penetration, I mean, what's age anyways, right? I'm just...
This is by far one of the scariest unsolved murders. Let's talk about it. This is Russell and Shirley Dermond. They were married for 64 years and went on to have 4 kids together. They were living in a nice house in a gated community on Lake Oconee in Putnam County, Georgia, and they were really enjoying their peaceful retired life. They were extremely loved by the community, but on May 6, 2014, their lives would tragically end. Russell and Shirley were last seen alive on May 1st running some errands in Eatonton, and they last spoke to their son later that same day on the phone. A few days later, later on May 3rd, the couple was supposed to attend a party with their neighbors for the 2014 Kentucky Derby, but they never showed up. 3 more days would pass with no word from the Dermans, and their neighbors became so worried that they went to their house to check on them. When they arrived, they found that the front door was unlocked, so they let themselves in. Everything inside the house seemed perfectly fine, but when the neighbor entered the garage, they found Russell's decapitated body lying in a pool of blood surrounded by towels. They obviously called 911 immediately because of the horrific scene, and when police arrived, they quickly realized that Shirley was missing. Police initially thought that Shirley had been kidnapped, so a massive search was launched. But sadly, 10 days later, Shirley's decomposed body was found floating in Lake Oconee by a couple of fishermen. She had initially been weighed down by 2 30-pound concrete blocks. According to the autopsy, Shirley died from 2 or 3 deep wounds to the head from a blunt object. Authorities initially believed that the murder stemmed from a robbery, but there were no signs of a break-in and nothing was taken from their home. Hundreds of tips and leads started pouring in, but to this day, the case remains unsolved. And the most horrifying part is that Russell's head has never been found. According to reports, gunshot residue was found on his collar, leading authorities to believe that he was decapitated after being shot in the head in order to stop police from finding the bullet. Over the years, people have speculated that the Dermans' deaths were related to their oldest son, Mark. Mark was killed in Atlanta in 2000 during a drug dispute, but police strongly believe that there is no connection. What makes this case so confusing is that there's still so many unanswered questions. Police still don't know whether or not the killer entered through the front gate of the community or if they had access to the back of the house by boat, but they do believe that multiple people were involved. Police also believe that the towels surrounding Russell's decapitated body were placed there to stop his blood from seeping out underneath the garage door. And as far as the concrete blocks tied to Shirley's body, investigators said that a professional would know that that wouldn't work. So the question remains on who would do this and why. According to police, new DNA evidence and cell phone data was discovered last year that they are hoping will lead to the people responsible. But they don't know if it's enough DNA evidence to be run through CODIS or if it even belongs to the killer. At this point, it could still just belong to Russell and Shirley. Investigators are using new technology to analyze the recent cell phone data found that wasn't existent in 2014, so they remain hopeful. But it's now been 10 years, and whoever killed Russell and Shirley and took his head is still out there.
If you've seen this man in your dreams, I have some bad news. So this is Hatman, and he is one of the most commonly seen sleep paralysis demons in the entire world. And here's how you know if you're about to see him. First, you'll wake up in the middle of the night and you won't be able to move at all. Like you'll feel completely paralyzed. Next, you'll feel a crushing feeling on your chest like something is sitting on it. And when this happens, it's going to be very hard to breathe. And at that point, there's nothing you can do. That's when Hatman comes into your room. Many doctors believe that Hatman is just a fragment of people's imaginations, but a lot of people think that he's shown up in photos like this one, or this eerie one that was taken on the day of these women's mother's funeral. In the next part, I'm gonna read some stories of people who believe they've seen him. If you see him while you're awake, run. So this story actually comes from a Reddit user who's a therapist, and this user had a patient who was coming in complaining of seeing Hatman at night. This patient would apparently wake up in the middle of the night to see Hatman standing at the foot of their bed, watching them sleep. And as a result, they were not really sleeping much. So the therapist prescribed some pretty heavy sleeping medication, and as a result, the patient starts getting a little better. But then one day, the patient comes in and just looks like they had seen a ghost. So the therapist asked them what was wrong, and they said that as they were getting...
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Back right. There's scratches right here. We got 1, 2, 3.
There are demons. That happened in a doctor's examination room. That felt so like someone threw scalding hot water in her eye.
And up against the wall, there are 3 upside-down crosses carved into the wood.
But I want to warn everyone, what is walking around this house is not a little, it's something dark.
When you come and play.
This place doesn't feel good to me. He started seeing this in his dream. Serial dream.
In this room, we've documented at least 23 people died. The house can be extremely aggressive and negative.
The device said, "I'm evil."
Oh, whoa, what the? Dude.
Oh, the door's open. We just got there on Saturday.
What the fuck was that? Is that something here? Okay, I gotta quit here.
I've seen people get affected before. I don't think I've ever seen my dad like this. It's a fucking
very bizarre, because I feel strange too. This is also called Big Black's room. Lots of people, lots of guests over the last years see a big tall shadow figure in here. It's over 6 foot tall. Dozens, if not hundreds of people claim to have seen it.
This is the elevator game. This game is a ritual of Korean origin and apparently allows you to go to other dimensions and contact spirits. I don't recommend trying it. The requirements to play the game are a building with an elevator and at least 10 floors. Also, you have to be alone in the elevator. To start the game, you have to be in the elevator on the 1st floor. Then press the button for the 4th floor. Then, once you reach the 4th floor, press the button for the 2nd floor. Then, when you reach the 2nd floor, press the button for the 6th floor. After this, press the button for the 2nd floor, and after that, the 10th floor. Finally, hit the button for the 5th floor. When you reach the 5th floor, a mysterious woman is supposed to appear. She will try and get your attention, but the rules of the game say you have to ignore her. After, press the button for the 1st floor, and if the elevator takes you to the 10th floor, this means you've done it correctly, and when the doors open, you will be in another dimension, and it could be a very peaceful one or a very, very dangerous one.
This is like a rabbit hole that I went down in, which was insane to me. What goes on in Telegram is literally like some fucked up shit, bro. I was like, why is it not talked about more, and why is this app is not like off the internet, bro?
The only thing I know about Telegram is that people use that shit to get like leaked nudes or whatever.
Leaked nudes, and then there's weed.
There's a lot. There's